Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Coming up on our program, the top law enforcement officer in Contra, Costa County tells us why he's against legislation to make California a sanctuary state. Plus, the Golden State Warriors pursuing another NBA championship and a chance to avenge last year's crushing finals defeat by the Cleveland Cavaliers. And we'll hear from Iranian-American comedian Maz Jobrani about fighting prejudice with punchlines. But first, on Tuesday, President Donald Trump fired FBI Director James Comey. Comey was leading the investigation into possible collusion between Trump aides and Russian officials to influence the 2016 election. California lawmakers, including House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy, responded swiftly to the news. On Wednesday, he defended the president's decision to dismiss Comey at an event organized by the news outlet Politico.
I'm just thinking we probably need to do. 4 months ago, every Democrat would tell me they've lost trust in Comey. If you lose trust, you got to change. I don't think the director of FBI should be a household name to everybody. I personally think when the FBI director thinks he becomes also the attorney general and the prosecutor, he's probably overstepped. And I think some of those past decisions have moved him into a different place. I would argue that Comey made FBI political. The investigation of Russia goes on. The committees are in the Senate and the House. This doesn't affect anything about it. People will get to whatever bottom. There's no one thing that I know of that's hanging out there that makes any difference in the process. I just think for the good of the FBI and the country, it's probably a good decision, and let's move on.
Thanks so much for doing this. Really. Taking the stage right after McCarthy was fellow California Congressman Eric Swalwell. The East Bay Democrat serves on the House Intelligence Committee. KQED reporter Shiraz Sadiq spoke with Congressman Swalwell to get his reaction to James Comey's firing.
It's an abuse of power of the highest magnitude. This is the United States of America. People expect that if the president is under investigation, he allows that investigation to proceed in an independent, credible way. Instead, he has fired the person who's investigating him, and that's something that we shouldn't tolerate.
And why do you think he was fired, and why now?
You can't speculate as to why he's fired. We just know that the FBI director was investigating the president's campaign. Last week, apparently, he had asked for more resources to investigate that campaign, and this week, he's now the former FBI director. That offends, I think, all of our senses about the independence that's supposed to exist between the president and law enforcement. Our sovereignty was attacked by Russia this past election. There are questions about whether any U.S. persons were involved, and the person who was leading that investigation was just fired. And so I think that's great cause for concern, and the best way to ensure that an investigation is pure would be to have an independent prosecutor, and also to have an independent commission look at how we were attacked and what reforms we can make to make sure it doesn't happen again.
So the GOP controls both houses of Congress as well as the presidency. What makes you think that they will go along with getting an independent commission or a special prosecutor?
Republicans may control Congress, but they don't control the American people. And the American people will still be heard, and 2/3 of the American people, before James Comey was fired, wanted an independent commission. So we have to stay loud, we have to stay relevant, and make sure that our leaders are held accountable.
Do you think the House Intelligence Committee will now subpoena James Comey?
I hope that former Director Comey comes before the House Intelligence Committee and we understand just what he was asking for, whether it was being denied or approved, and what he believes led to this firing. There's a number of questions about where the evidence was taking him, whether he had all the resources he would need, whether any pressure was being applied by the White House. I think those are all relevant questions. The Senate will interview him potentially next week, and I don't think we should miss an opportunity either. Our committee's investigation must go forward. We're in a search for the truth, and we should be able to do that without regard to politics.
Last month, the state Senate approved a bill that would make California a sanctuary for undocumented immigrants. With rare exceptions, it would bar law enforcement from sharing information and cooperating with immigration officials. But critics contend the bill is unnecessary and, moreover, would hamper efforts to deport violent criminals in the country illegally. Meanwhile, several counties in California, including Contra Costa, have contracts with federal immigration enforcement to house detainees in their jails. The fate of those contracts would be in jeopardy if a separate state bill becomes law. Joining me now is Contra Costa County Sheriff David Livingston. Sheriff, nice to have you here.
Thank you.
And as we mentioned, Contra Costa does have a contract with ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to house federal detainees at your jail in Richmond. Now, how long have you had this contract, and why did you agree to it?
The contract actually began back in 1992 with the U.S. Marshal Service. More recently, ICE has asked to also use that contract to hold some of their detainees in our facility, which it's important to note is a dormitory-style building in West County. It is intended specifically for that type of population. They actually have keys to their own cell doors. It's minimum to low security, and it's extra bed space. So we thought it prudent to go ahead and rent those spaces to ICE, generate revenue, and reduce the operating costs to the taxpayers of Contra Costa County.
How much revenue do you get from it a year?
Typically, it's about $6 million a year.
Okay. And then how many detainees on a given day, a given month?
Our average is about 200 a day, although that moves day to day by as many as 10 or 20 in either direction.
So on any given day, though, there are most people in your jail are there for reasons unrelated to immigration. They may be awaiting trial, they're serving time for other crimes. But in this country, all inmates have their fingerprints sent to the FBI database. So once federal immigration authorities figure out that some of the folks you have there are undocumented, what do they want you to do?
So essentially, anyone that's booked into my jail, and for Contra Costa, of course, we don't have a choice who comes in the facility. Everyone is booked into one of our jails. Those fingerprints are automatically sent to Homeland Security and to FBI. It's at that time that ICE determines that they may want to interview one of the persons recently arrested in my facility, for example, and they notify us that they'd like to talk to that person. Formally, they might put on a request for a hold. Holds are no longer allowed in California. We don't honor holds. If that person is subject to being released at a certain time, we release them at that time. If ICE is present to interview them, we'll allow the interview to occur. Otherwise, that person is released.
Do you ever proactively contact ICE to let them know that someone is about to be released?
If there is a particular individual that has come to our attention as a violent offender or a serious offender, or who self-discloses that they may be subject to ICE investigation, we'll notify ICE that they may be interested in this person, but that doesn't happen very often. ICE typically knows who they want to interview, and by the way, when they come in to do that interview, in many cases they do not remove the person into their custody.
You know, a lot of people take issue with that, though. You've had a number of protests at your facility. People who feel it's wrong for you to do this, wrong for you to proactively contact ICE. How do you respond to that?
Well, it's a relatively small group of people. It's somewhere between 30 and 50 that appear pretty regularly to protest. My obligation as sheriff for Contra Costa County is to provide public safety to the entire county. That's 1.1 million people. So we focus on what's best, in our view, in providing public safety to everyone, not just particular special interest groups. And we already have a policy that I have signed off on that says we will do no immigration enforcement at all for our deputies on the street. This is really about the back end when someone who is already here undocumented has committed a new crime and now finds himself in jail.
Several cities throughout California have declared themselves sanctuary cities, and now there's a bill, SB 54, the state bill that would make all of California a sanctuary state, right, and prohibit law enforcement agencies like yours from cooperating with federal immigration agents. Where do you stand on SB 54?
I, like nearly all of my colleagues in California and the State Sheriff's Association, are absolutely opposed to that bill. We think it's a disaster. It's the first time that we have heard of where the state government is trying to tell us who we can talk to and who we can't talk to among other law enforcement agencies. It would hamper our efforts in a very demonstrable way. We couldn't share basic information about human trafficking or other cases with ICE unless the individual has a prior conviction for a serious or violent felony. And so putting those kinds of restrictions on our access to our federal colleagues and partners can be very damaging to public safety. We oppose it.
Supporters of the bill, though, say that the flip side of this is that there would be damage to public safety from another angle, and that is it would make undocumented immigrants so fearful of deportation that they would be less willing to cooperate with you and other law enforcement agencies, less willing to report crimes.
Well, we want everyone to feel comfortable coming to their local law enforcement agency or the sheriff's office to report a crime, of course, either to report a crime as a victim or a witness. We work in communities now, North Richmond, for example, where we already encounter those types of issues, and it's very difficult to get people to come forward to work with us reporting crimes.
But
so
wouldn't those issues be
new.
exacerbated, though, if you keep on opposing this sanctuary bill?
I don't believe so. In fact, if we have the situation where ICE has to go now into the community to take someone into custody who may be facing a felony or a very serious charge, when they could have had that interview conducted in the safety and security of a custodial facility, that's putting more people at risk. So we believe at least working with ICE to the extent that they can conduct an interview makes sense.
You're currently seeking $95 million to expand the West County facility. State Senator Nancy Skinner of Berkeley has a bill that essentially bars state funds from being used for jail expansions in counties that hold ICE detainees. So your seeking of this $95 million in fund could be in jeopardy if this bill passes. Your thoughts on Senator Skinner's bill?
I think Senator Skinner has moved the goalposts in the middle of the game. We applied in good faith for those funds to build a reentry facility that will help those that need it most in our custody, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment. That's what this is about. It's a $70 million grant with matching funds that the county would come up with. The grants will be awarded as early as next week. It's a very competitive grant, and we've had this contract with ICE for many, many years. So to now say, well, if you receive the grant funds, you're not going to be able to have contracts with any federal agency, I think is just patently unfair, and it's inappropriate.
All right, Sheriff David Livingston of Contra, Costa County, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And now to politics and humor. Iranian-American comedian and author Maz Jobrani stars in the CBS primetime comedy Superior Donuts, where he plays an Iraqi immigrant businessman.
Well, at first you can drive me around, maybe run some errands. But the more you learn, the more I'll give you to do. You'll be my right-hand man.
Word? All right, okay. So what about the pay?
Open for negotiation. Tell me, what does Arthur pay you?
$10.50 an hour.
First lesson, never reveal your current salary. Now I could offer you $10.75 and you take it.
I'll take it.
A decade ago, he helped launch the Axis of Evil comedy tour, featuring comedians with Middle Eastern roots whose stand-up routines attack stereotypes, one joke at a time.
You do too, like people think just because I'm from the Middle East, I'm an expert on the Middle East. So I got a friend, anytime the gas prices go up, he'll always ask my opinion about it. He'll always corner me, hey Maz, in your opinion, what's going on with this gas thing? What's gonna happen? What's going on? 50 words or less, break it down, would you?
And Maz Jobrani is now back in the Bay Area this weekend. He's here to give the commencement address at his alma mater, UC Berkeley. Welcome. Nice to have you here.
Nice to be here. How are you?
Go Bears. I'm a Cal grad, too.
Yeah, you and I both of us get disappointed every football season with our team. Oh,
that's true. Well, but you get to give the commencement address. I've never had that honor. What are you planning to say?
You know, it was interesting because when they first invited me, I just instantly said yes because I am, I was honored to be asked. But then the next day, I started freaking out because I was like, I got to write a speech. And the truth is I'm a comedian and I'm not used to writing speeches. So I've been kind of molding the whole thing together. And as a comedian, I feel like I need to be funny a little bit. So I'm going to try and be funny. And then I feel like I got to talk about a few things. First of all, as an immigrant, as an Iranian-American immigrant, I feel like I got to talk about that since that's a hot topic nowadays. Yeah. And I think that might be why I was chosen. And then I hope to also touch on free speech a little bit because it is Berkeley and all the stuff that's been going on.
Sure.
And then I just hope to end with a few just lines of wisdom that I've picked up here and there, and then they can all go have their brunch and mimosas, and we'll have a great day.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your Iranian background. Your family fled Iran during the 1979 revolution. You were 6 years old at the time. So, given that background, what's the message that you want to put out there, and how would you describe your comedy? Is it political comedy?
Yeah, you know, my comedy, somebody asked me a little while back, because I have young kids as well now. I have a 6-year-old girl, 8-year-old boy. So I always say in my comedy I take on social issues, political issues, and my kids. So it touches a wide array of things. And of course now with the Trump administration, it feels like the political stuff has gotten even more pertinent right now. I just filmed a Netflix special that'll come out later this summer, but I did it in Washington, D.C. at the Kennedy Center, basically in Trump's backyard, and I call it Maz Jobrani Immigrant, because I really want to make a point about how you're an immigrant, I'm an immigrant, and how immigrants come to America because we love America. We want to come here and make America better, make ourselves better, and there's just such an anti-immigrant sentiment that's out there in some parts of this country, and a lot of it is coming through our president. And so I want to fight that message by getting out there and letting people know that we are good people and we should be accepted.
So how do you think you fight that message? In what way?
Well, I think that part of it is, one of the things is when the travel ban happened, I got really upset with the travel ban because it made me, first of all, I started hearing real stories of real people being affected by it. As an Iranian-American comedian, people were sending me their stories. And it reminded me of when I came to America. Actually, we arrived late '78, and I thought, what if I had left the revolution, come to America, landed here, and just as it happened to a few people, they would have put me back on a plane with my family and sent me back to Iran. What kind of trauma would that have caused me? What kind of trauma would that have caused my family? How would that have affected my destiny? So when you think about that and it becomes personal, originally I just went out there and started posting on Facebook and telling people my story, and then it just caused people to argue. So I said, you know what, rather than posting like that, I'm just going to start putting out the stories that I'm hearing, the real stories. And so when I would get articles of different people being affected by this, I would post it on my Facebook page, or I would talk to friends of mine. I had a friend of mine who's a Republican who really did not understand all the fuss that was being made from the protesters. And he said, well, he thought that it was just a little bit of an inconvenience at some airports. And I said, no, people are being affected. So once people, I think, hear the real life stories of other people, I think it opens their eyes. And I think Americans in general are sympathetic people. And so that's what I try to do.
So that's the serious side of you. And then the comedic side of you. For example, in your show Superior Donuts, do you ever feel worried that you might be reinforcing certain stereotypes?
Well, the thing with Superior Donuts is, you know, it's a sitcom. And in all honesty, as an actor of Middle Eastern descent, I always say, like, it's a, you know, I'm playing a businessman from Iraq. So that just in itself is a huge step compared to what we're used to playing. We're used to playing terrorists. We're used to playing.
You played a terrorist at one point in a Chuck Norris movie.
Yeah, early on I played a terrorist in a Chuck Norris movie. I played a terrorist in the TV show 24. And then after I did the 24, this was years ago, it just put a bad taste in my mouth. So I told my agents, no more terrorist parts. But I don't mind playing you know, falafel store owners or cab drivers or any of those, because I know Middle Easterners that are that. However, with that said, I feel like this thing in Superior Donuts, as much as the character is this businessman who's trying to buy up the buildings in the neighborhood, they give me a lot of funny lines, and I've been getting a lot of positive responses from people that are not of Middle Eastern descent. They've hit me up on social media, and they're enjoying the character. So I think that as long as we can start making people like characters of Middle Eastern descent in film and television, I think that that's a good push in the right direction.
And a lot of comedy comes from challenges, right? And from tragedy. Are there times when the tragedy is just so great, though, that you can't joke about it?
Well, I always say if there's a tragedy, I think that I never make fun of the victims of anything. Like after September 11th, for example, in all honesty, when September 11th happened, I just thought that no one could ever be funny again. I was so devastated by the whole thing. You know, the song, The Day the Music Died, I felt like it was the day the comedy died. I just thought, how could we ever be funny again? But then quickly, when I started seeing that the Bush administration was using those attacks as an excuse to go into Iraq, I realized, oh wow, there's actually a job for us to try and talk about some of this stuff. And then you also make fun of the terrorists. You make fun of them. And those are the people you make fun of. You don't make fun of the victims, you make fun of the perpetrators of the crime.
You had studied political science at UC Berkeley. You even started a PhD program, but your real love was acting. And here you are with parents who are immigrants from Iran. What did they think of that?
My parents wanted me to be a lawyer originally. Then,
of course they did.
Of course, because immigrant parents want you to be a lawyer or a doctor. And when I didn't become a lawyer, I thought maybe I'd be a professor to kind of please them, but also be able to be in front of a crowd. And then I started a PhD program, and I dropped out of that. And I swear to God, my mother actually said, she goes, you did not become a lawyer, you did not become a professor. At least become a mechanic. I swear to God. And I go, how'd you go from lawyer to mechanic? And she goes, people need mechanics. Nobody needs an actor. and she was right. But
they need a comedian.
They need a comedian. Here I am.
Ba-dum-bum. Maz Jobrani, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, Twee.
And we should also tell you that Jobrani will be performing at Cobb's Comedy Club in San Francisco this Friday and Saturday. Busy weekend in the Bay Area, including the Warriors game. KQED's Scott Schaefer has more.
This weekend, the Golden State Warriors resume their run for a second NBA title in 3 years. They'll take on the San Antonio Spurs Sunday at home for the first game of their best-of-7 series for the Western Conference. For a look at what stands between the Warriors and another championship, I'm joined now by Bay Area News Group columnist Marcus Thompson. So about those Spurs, they beat the Warriors twice out of 3 games during the regular season by a combined margin of 51 points. What, if anything, does that say about what's going to happen starting Sunday?
Absolutely nothing. The first one was the first game of the season, and I think that was just a shock and awe campaign. It was just the Spurs were ready to play, and the Warriors were trying to show everybody how great they were.
It was Durant's first game.
Durant's first game. That was just the weirdness of it all. And then they rested the other game. They rested all their starters famously. So I think everybody knows this is a much different situation. The Warriors are healthy and peaking.
So they've had some adversity this year, the Warriors have. Durant was out for a spell, and during that period they lost 3 games in a row. I think they lost 5 out of 7. And then they got their mojo back and they went on a run. What did we learn? What did you learn about the team during that stretch?
Well, number one, Steph Curry's still pretty good. I think a lot of people forgot about that. But they built this on chemistry, right? They built this on just how they play the game. And they got back to that. During that stretch, they relied on what got them here, which is ball movement, sharing, just the chemistry and camaraderie. And they had a pretty soft schedule, but I think now that Durant is back, they realize we need to play this way no matter who we have, and let's bring him into this instead of changing.
When you say this way, what does that mean?
It's a lot of passing, a lot of sharing. It's relying on each other. It's shooting the ball well. It's, taking advantage of mismatches. They have a very free-flowing style. They play really hard defense, and they want to run a fast break. So if they do that, I don't think they can be stopped.
And they're fun to watch.
Oh, man, it is a pleasure. The way they shoot threes, the way they pass the ball, there's a ballet kind of feeling to how they play basketball. There is some finesse and
choreography
fun to it. Oh, yeah, it's especially with Steph, and you don't know what's going to happen, and just the pace of it all is frenetic.
So when the Warriors signed Kevin Durant at the end of last season, they'd already won 73 games.
Yes.
So how could they possibly be any better? What kind of adjustments have Klay Thompson and Draymond Green and Steph Curry and Iguodala, what kind of adjustments have they had to make with Durant there?
So Klay Thompson doesn't make adjustments. He's been the same. The real adjustment was Steph, because this was his team and everything was centered around him, and he took a more passive approach. It actually hurt him at first, but he wanted to welcome Durant, make sure Durant was happy. Draymond kind of pushed away from offense and focused on locking in on defense, so he got really good defensively. And they all kind of had to, they started watching Durant, and it was all about making him happy, because he still has to sign a new contract this offseason, so they want to make sure he stays. Eventually they figured out, well, we're not going to win this thing if we just cater to Durant. We have to play our game, and that's what they started doing.
I want to ask you about Coach Steve Kerr. He's been out for a bit now. He's had back problems for a couple of years, I think, better part of,
yes.
of 2 years. What's his status, and what is going on behind the scenes to make sure that it's been a smooth transition? They're 8-0 in the playoffs without Steve Kerr, so they're doing well, but what's been going on?
So Steve is trying to, in essence, get his life back. I mean, for the last 2 years, since he had a back surgery in July 2015, then he had his spine was nicked, so he had a spinal fluid leak, and that was corrected in September 2015. And since then, he's been suffering through a lot of pain and just discomfort and nausea. And I think they're to the point where it's like, we don't want you to coach through that. We want you to get healthy. So he's trying to get healthy. He just had a procedure at Duke, and they're trying to fix the problem. And
how hard was that for the players?
Oh, man. So they love Steve, right? They respect him. He's good to them. So for the people in the organization, it just hurts to see him hurting, because he's constantly in pain.
What about on the court?
On the court, he's their disciplinarian, right? He's the one that's like, we're not doing that.
He's in charge of breaking clipboards.
Absolutely, right? He breaks clipboards. He tells Steph that was a bad turnover. He screams at Draymond. He's the guy that sets them in order. So they do have a little bit of substitute teacher is here when Steve Kerr is gone, but they are a well-oiled machine. I mean, you and I could really get in there and coach this team.
Well, maybe you.
Right? We get in there and just look the part. Steph, do your thing.
One of the things that Steve Kerr has done in the past year is he's gotten very political with the election of Donald Trump. How political is the team, including the players?
It's really political. I think they really take to this whole Bay Area vibe of, like, a lot of teams like to keep the outside world out and just kind of quarantine themselves. The Warriors don't do that. They're into it. They're aware of what's going on. Steve Kerr starts there, Steph Curry.
But was it an awakening caused in part by Steve Kerr? Or?
You know, it was always there, but Steve Kerr is just so open about it. It gave them license. You see Steph Curry being a little bit more politically vocal. You see Andre Iguodala speaking out. So I think they had that bent. They just did it behind the scenes and quietly. But Steve said, no, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about it out loud, and we're going to criticize who we need to criticize.
And it plays well in the Bay Area.
Oh, man, doesn't it, right? Man, if you want to win over Bay Area people, you just criticize the current administration.
I don't want to jump too far out in front, but the other 8-0 team in the playoffs, the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Go ahead and jump there.
Everyone wants to see that matchup in the end. What would it mean to see these two teams play for the third consecutive year in the finals?
Number one, it would mean history. Like, it's never happened before. I feel like we deserve it. They owe us this, right? It's a rubber match.
We were up last year 3-1 and lost 4-3.
They each won a title. They have to finish this trilogy, and don't wait until everybody's like 59 years old and try to do it then. Do it right now while both teams are really good. That's what I want to see. It would be revenge. It would be redemption. But I think later we'll look at this and say, what a time in history. That was a great 3-year run.
Quick prediction
for Spurs.
For the Spurs.
Oh, Warriors in 5.
In 5. So they'll get one game maybe at home in San Antonio.
It's a gentleman's sweep. That's what we call it.
All right. Marcus Thompson, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
And that does it for us. For more of our coverage, go to kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Thuy Vu. Thanks for watching.